The morning mist clung to the Ukrainian countryside like a shroud, and Senior Lieutenant Lyudmila Pavlichenko adjusted her rifle scope one final time. 3 enemy positions. 3 confirmed kills needed. What happened next would be called impossible by military historians for decades to come, until the smoke cleared and the bodies were counted. This is the story of the deadliest female sniper in history, and the single moment that defined not just her legacy, but the entire course of World War II's Eastern Front. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The year was 1942, and the siege of Sevastopol had been grinding on for months. The German Wehrmacht, supported by Romanian forces, had encircled the strategic port city on the Crimean Peninsula. For the defenders, every day brought new horrors constant. Artillery bombardment, dwindling supplies, and the ever-present threat of sniper fire from German marksmen who had turned the rubbled cityscape into their personal hunting ground. But among the Soviet defenders was someone who would turn the hunters into the hunted. Lyudmila Pavlichenko wasn't supposed to be there. Born in 1916, she had been a history student at Kiev University, more interested in books than bullets. But when the Great Patriotic War erupted in June 1941, everything changed. Like millions of her countrymen, Pavlichenko felt the call to defend the motherland. What made her different was her unusual hobby. She had been a member of her university's shooting club, where she had demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to hit targets at incredible distances. When she first approached the recruitment office, the officers laughed. A woman? A sniper? The very idea seemed absurd. The Soviet military, despite its progressive rhetoric, was still dominated by traditional gender roles. Women could serve as medics, communications operators, or in support roles, but combat positions were reserved for men. Pavlichenko would have none of it. She had trained extensively with rifles, had natural talent, and most importantly, she had the ice-cold determination that would prove essential in the brutal warfare to come. Her persistence paid off, but barely. The recruiting officers, perhaps more out of curiosity than conviction, agreed to give her a chance. They handed her a rifle and pointed to a distant target. What happened next would become legendary in Soviet military circles. Pavlichenko didn't just hit the target, she hit it dead center, again and again, with mechanical precision that left the hardened military veteran speechless. Within hours, she was officially enrolled as a sniper in the Red Army's 25th Chapayev Division. Her first deployment was to Odessa, where German forces were advancing rapidly along the Black Sea coast. For a young woman who had spent her life in lecture halls and libraries, the reality of war was a brutal awakening. The constant thunder of artillery, the screams of wounded soldiers, the acrid smell of cordite and death, it was a world away from the academic life she had known. But Pavlichenko adapted with frightening speed. Her first kill came within days of arriving at the front. A German machine gunner had been terrorizing Soviet positions from a concealed nest in a bombed-out building. For hours he had pinned down an entire company, making any movement deadly. Pavlichenko studied the position through her scope, calculated wind speed and distance, and squeezed the trigger. The machine gun fell silent permanently. When her commanding officer asked how she felt about her first kill, Pavlichenko's response was chillingly matter-of-fact. He was shooting at my people. Now he's not. This pragmatic approach would define her entire career. While other soldiers struggled with the psychological toll of taking human lives, Pavlichenko seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to compartmentalize. Each German soldier in her crosshairs wasn't a person with hopes and dreams. He was simply a target that needed to be eliminated to protect her comrades and her homeland. This mental discipline, combined with her exceptional marksmanship skills, made her incredibly effective. Within weeks of her deployment to Odessa, Pavlichenko had racked up an impressive kill count. Her reputation began to spread, not just among Soviet forces but among the German troops who were beginning to realize they were being hunted by someone extraordinary. German snipers who had dominated the urban battlefield with their superior equipment and training suddenly found themselves outmatched by a 25-year-old history student from Kiev. The siege of Odessa lasted 73 days, and by the time Soviet forces were forced to evacuate the city, Pavlichenko had confirmed 187 kills. But this was just the beginning. The real test would come at Sevastopol, where she would face the most skilled German marksmen on the Eastern Front, and where her legend would be cemented forever. The stage was set for a confrontation that would push the boundaries of what was considered possible in sniper warfare, culminating in that misty morning when 3 impossible shots would change everything. Sevastopol, in 1942, was hell on earth. The ancient port city, built on limestone cliffs overlooking the Black Sea, had become a maze of rubble and death. German artillery pounded the defenders around the clock, turning centuries-old buildings into twisted metal and pulverized stone. In this apocalyptic landscape, snipers ruled supreme. Every window, every pile of debris, every shadow could conceal a marksman ready to end a life with a single shot. Into this nightmare stepped Lyudmila Pavlichenko, carrying with her a reputation that had already begun to terrify German forces. The Germans knew she was coming. Intelligence reports had filtered through their ranks about the deadly female sniper who had wreaked havoc in Odessa. They had even assigned her a code name, Lady Death. What they didn't know was just how far she was willing to push the limits of her deadly craft. The siege of Sevastopol would become her masterpiece, a months-long duel between the finest marksmen of 2 nations locked in mortal combat. Pavlichenko's new position was with the Soviet 54th Regiment, defending the northern approaches to the city. The terrain was brutal open ground broken by rocky outcroppings and the skeletal remains of destroyed buildings. German forces held the high ground, giving their snipers clear fields of fire across the Soviet positions. For any normal soldier, movement during daylight hours meant almost certain death. But Pavlichenko wasn't normal. She studied the German positions with the methodical precision of the historian she had once been. Every enemy sniper nest was catalogued, their patterns of movement analyzed, their weaknesses identified. She understood that she wasn't just fighting a battle, she was engaged in a complex psychological war, where reputation and fear were as important as bullets and accuracy. The Germans had to know they were being hunted, had to feel the constant threat of death from an unseen enemy. Her method was patience personified. While other soldiers grew restless in their positions, Pavlichenko could lie motionless for hours, studying her targets through her scope. She learned to read the landscape like a book, identifying the telltale signs that revealed enemy positions, the glint of a scope lens, the subtle movement of camouflage material, the pattern of shadows that didn't quite match the surrounding terrain. Most importantly, she learned to think like her prey, anticipating their movements and positioning herself accordingly. The psychological warfare began almost immediately. German snipers who had grown comfortable in their dominance suddenly found themselves vulnerable. Men who had terrorized Soviet positions for weeks were picked off one by one, often from impossible angles and at ranges that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Pavlichenko had an uncanny ability to find shots that other marksmen would never even attempt, threading bullets between obstacles, using ricochet shots to reach targets in supposedly safe positions, and most unnervingly, eliminating multiple targets in rapid succession before they could react. The German command took notice. Counter-sniper teams were deployed specifically to hunt down Lady Death. These weren't ordinary soldiers, they were elite marksmen, many of them veterans of the Wehrmacht's campaigns across Europe. They brought with them the finest equipment the German military could provide: high-powered rifles with advanced optics, specialized ammunition, and years of training in the deadly Art of sniper warfare. The hunt for Pavlichenko became a priority mission, but hunting the hunter proved more dangerous than the Germans anticipated. Pavlichenko had an almost supernatural awareness of when she was being stalked. She would change positions constantly, never using the same hide twice, and always seeming to know when enemy snipers were closing in. Several German marksmen who were sent to eliminate her ended up eliminated themselves, their bodies discovered days later with single-bullet wounds. To the head Pavlichenko's signature, the psychological impact on German forces was profound. Soldiers who had once moved with confidence through their positions now scurried from cover to cover, always aware that death might be watching through a distant scope. The mere rumor that Lady Death was operating in their sector was enough to demoralize entire units. German officers found themselves dealing with requests for transfers, claims of illness, and in some extreme cases, soldiers who simply refused to leave their bunkers. For Pavlichenko, each confirmed kill was more than just a military victory, it was a mathematical equation. Range, wind speed, target movement, ammunition ballistics, every variable had to be calculated with perfect precision. There was no room for error, no second chances. In the sniper's world, you either killed or died, and Pavlichenko had no intention of dying. Her kill count continued to climb, 200, 250, 280, confirmed kills. Each number represented hours of patient stalking, moments of perfect calm under extreme pressure, and the absolute commitment to her mission. But the Germans weren't giving up. They brought in their most elite counter-sniper specialists men, whose reputations were built on eliminating exactly the kind of threat Pavlichenko represented. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test every skill she had developed. The morning of the impossible shot was approaching, though Pavlichenko didn't know it yet. 3 German snipers, positioned in a formation designed to provide mutual support and eliminate any threat, were about to discover that reputation and reality were very different things. What happened next would redefine what was considered possible in sniper warfare. The intelligence came in during the pre-dawn hours of what would become the most legendary day in sniper warfare history. Soviet reconnaissance had identified a new German sniper team that had taken position in the ruins of what had once been Sevastopol's municipal library. 3 marksmen, positioned in a triangular formation across multiple buildings, had already claimed the lives of 17 Soviet soldiers in just 2 days. Their positioning was masterful. Each sniper could cover the approaches to the other's positions, creating an interlocking field of fire that seemed impenetrable. Senior Lieutenant Pavlichenko studied the reconnaissance reports with the intensity of a chess grandmaster analyzing a particularly complex position. The German team wasn't composed of ordinary soldiers. Intelligence suggested these were members of the Wehrmacht's elite sniper corps, possibly including graduates of the legendary German sniper school at Senior. These men had been trained by the best marksmen in the German military, equipped with the finest rifles and optics available, and they had already proven their deadly effectiveness. The positioning of the German snipers was tactically perfect. The first marksman had taken up residence in the library's clock tower, giving him an elevated position with commanding views of the Soviet approaches. The second sniper was positioned in a bombed-out apartment building roughly 300 meters to the northeast, his hide carefully constructed among the rubble to provide both concealment and multiple firing positions. The third sniper occupied the ruins of a small church to the southeast, where the partially collapsed bell tower provided excellent cover while maintaining clear sight lines across the entire area. What made this formation so deadly wasn't just the individual skill of the snipers, it was their coordination. They operated as a team, communicating through hand signals and pre-arranged codes. When one engaged a target, the others would be ready to eliminate any threat that attempted to interfere. They had studied Soviet tactics, learned to anticipate counter-sniper operations, and positioned themselves to turn any rescue attempt into a killing ground. For 3 days, Soviet forces had tried to neutralize the German sniper team using conventional tactics. Artillery strikes had been called in, but the snipers were too well concealed and mobile, disappearing into the rubble whenever the bombardment began and emerging once it ended. Infantry assaults had been attempted, but the interlocking fields of fire made any approach suicidal. Counter-sniper teams had been deployed, but the German marksmen had proven too skilled, too well-positioned, and too coordinated to be eliminated by standard methods. The Soviet command was growing desperate. The German sniper team was effectively paralyzing an entire sector of the front line. Soldiers were afraid to move during daylight hours. Supply runs had become nearly impossible, and morale was plummeting. Something had to be done, but conventional wisdom suggested that neutralizing a well-coordinated sniper team of this caliber would require massive resources and significant casualties. That's when Pavlichenko volunteered for what many considered a suicide mission. She would attempt to eliminate all 3 German snipers in a single operation. The proposal was met with skepticism from her commanding officers. Taking on one elite enemy sniper was dangerous enough. Attempting to eliminate 3 simultaneously seemed like madness. The Germans would be watching for exactly this kind of counter-sniper operation, and they would be ready. But Pavlichenko had something her skeptics didn't, an almost supernatural understanding of sniper warfare and the psychological profiles of her enemies. She had spent weeks studying German sniper tactics, learning their preferred positions, their movement patterns, and most importantly, their psychological tendencies under pressure. She knew that elite snipers, despite their training, were still human beings with predictable responses to specific stimuli. Her plan was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its precision requirements. Rather than trying to engage the German snipers individually over an extended period, she would create a situation where all 3 would be exposed simultaneously, giving her the opportunity to eliminate them in rapid succession before they could react or withdraw. The window of opportunity would be measured in seconds, and there would be no room for error. The key to her strategy was understanding how the German team would respond to a perceived threat. Elite snipers were trained to maintain their positions under most circumstances, but they were also trained to communicate and coordinate when facing a significant threat. Pavlichenko intended to exploit this training, using the Germans' own tactical discipline against them. She spent the entire night before the operation studying the target area through her scope, memorizing every detail of the terrain, calculating ranges and wind patterns, and identifying the precise sequence of shots that would be required. The mathematics were staggering: 3 targets at different ranges, different elevations, different angles, all of which would need to be engaged within seconds of each other to prevent the survivors from escaping or calling for reinforcements. Weather conditions on the morning of the operation were perfect. Light mist that would provide concealment without significantly affecting bullet trajectory, minimal wind that would simplify ballistic calculations, and overcast skies that would prevent scope glare from giving away her position. As dawn broke over the ruined city of Sevastopol, Pavlichenko moved into position for what would become the most famous sniper engagement in military history. The impossible was about to become reality, and 3 of Germany's finest marksmen were about to discover that Lady Death had earned her reputation through more than just luck and determination. The position Pavlichenko selected for her impossible mission was itself a testament to her tactical genius. Rather than choosing the obvious high ground that most snipers would prefer, she positioned herself in the ruins of a bombed-out bakery at ground level, approximately 400 meters from the nearest German position. The location offered something far more valuable than elevation. It provided multiple, concealed firing positions with clear sight lines to all 3 enemy snipers, while remaining completely invisible to their overlapping fields of observation. bakery had been destroyed early in the siege, its walls partially collapsed and its interior filled with debris. But Pavlichenko saw what others missed. The rubble created natural firing ports at precisely the right angles, and the destruction pattern provided perfect camouflage for a sniper hide. She had spent the previous evening carefully constructing her position, moving debris by hand to create the exact firing lanes she would need while ensuring that her location remained completely invisible from the German positions. Her weapon for this legendary engagement was a Soviet-produced Mosin Nagant rifle, Model 91/30, equipped with a PU 3.5x telescope sight. While the German snipers were armed with superior Karabiner 98K rifles with advanced Zeiss optics, Pavlichenko had learned to maximize the potential of her more modest equipment. She knew her rifle's ballistic characteristics perfectly, understood exactly how it would perform at different ranges and weather conditions, and had modified her shooting technique to compensate for any limitations in her equipment. The ammunition she selected for this mission was special armor-piercing rounds that she had personally inspected and prepared. Each cartridge had been checked for perfect uniformity, the cases polished to ensure smooth chambering, and the bullets examined under magnification for any imperfections that might affect accuracy. In sniper warfare, the difference between success and failure often came down to tiny details that ordinary soldiers would never consider. As the sun rose higher, burning away the morning mist, Pavlichenko began her final preparations. She had already spent hours calculating the precise ballistic data for each target. The first sniper in the clock tower was 380 meters away at an elevation angle of 32 degrees. The second in the apartment building was 415 meters at a 15-degree angle, and the third in the church ruins was 425 meters at a slight downward angle of 8 degrees. Each shot would require different compensation for bullet drop, and the rapid succession of engagements would demand split-second adjustments that few marksmen in the world could execute. But the technical challenges were only part of the equation. The psychological warfare had already begun. Pavlichenko knew that the German snipers were watching for exactly the kind of counter-sniper operation she was planning. They would be alert, suspicious of any unusual activity, and ready to disappear at the first sign of a threat. Her success would depend on remaining completely invisible until the moment she was ready to strike, and then executing her plan with such speed and precision that the Germans would have no time to react. The first phase of her plan involved psychological manipulation on a level that would have impressed intelligence operatives. Using a technique she had developed during her time in Odessa, Pavlichenko created the illusion of normal Soviet activity in the area. She had positioned several decoy targets' helmets on sticks, carefully arranged equipment, and even a mannequin dressed in a Soviet uniform to draw the attention of the German snipers and make them believe they were observing routine defensive positions, preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The German snipers took the bait perfectly. Through her scope, Pavlichenko watched as they adjusted their positions to get better angles on what they believed were legitimate targets. The sniper in the clock tower shifted slightly to his left, improving his view of the decoy positions, but unknowingly exposing more of his silhouette. The marksman in the apartment building leaned forward to get a clearer shot through the rubble, moving out of his carefully prepared hide. The third sniper in the church ruins adjusted his rifle position, creating a slight reflection from his scope that gave away his exact location. This was the moment. Pavlichenko had been waiting for. All three German snipers were focused on her decoys, their attention directed away from her actual position, and each had made small adjustments that would prove fatal. The window of opportunity was open, but it would remain open for only seconds. The slightest mistake, the smallest hesitation, and the Germans would realize they had been outmaneuvered. Pavlichenko's breathing slowed to the deep, controlled rhythm that all expert marksmen develop. Her heart rate dropped as her body entered the almost meditative state that separates elite snipers from ordinary shooters. Through her scope, the world narrowed to a series of precise calculations: range, wind speed, target movement, bullet trajectory. Everything else disappeared: the sounds of distant artillery, the smell of cordite in the air, the knowledge that her own life depended on the next few seconds. The first target was the sniper in the clock tower. At 380 meters and elevated 32 degrees, he presented the most technically challenging shot due to the extreme angle and the partial concealment of his position. But he had made a crucial error in adjusting his position to get a better view of the decoys. He had exposed his head and shoulders in a way that provided Pavlichenko with a clear shot. She made the microscopic adjustments to her scope, calculated the precise holdover required for the upward angle, and settled her crosshairs on the target. The second target, in the apartment building, would be engaged immediately after the first shot. The 415-meter range was well within her comfort zone, but the target was partially concealed behind rubble, presenting only a small portion of his torso. The shot would require perfect precision, as even a slight miss would only wound the target and allow him to escape or return fire. The third target presented unique challenges. The downward angle meant she would need to adjust her hold differently than for the other two shots, and the range of 425 meters was at the outer edge of what she considered reliable for rapid engagement. But she had studied this target extensively and knew exactly where he would be positioned when the shooting started. Time seemed to compress into a single, crystalline moment as Pavlichenko's finger moved to the trigger of her Mosin Nagant. 3 years of war, hundreds of confirmed kills, and countless hours of training had led to this instant. The German sniper in the clock tower was perfectly aligned in her crosshairs, his silhouette clearly defined against the morning sky. She had calculated every variable: the 380-meter range, the 32-degree elevation angle, the slight crosswind that would drift her bullet approximately 2 inches to the left, and the ballistic characteristics of her armor-piercing round. The first shot broke the morning silence like thunder. The 7.6 2x54 Umar cartridge left the barrel of her rifle at 2,800 feet per second, its trajectory arcing slightly upward to compensate for the elevation difference. The bullet traveled the 380 meters to its target in less than half a second, striking the German sniper in the center of his chest with devastating effect. Through her scope, Pavlichenko watched as the enemy marksman jerked backward, his rifle clattering against the stone ledge of the clock tower before tumbling into the rubble below. But there was no time to observe the results of her first shot. The moment her rifle fired, Pavlichenko was already transitioning to her second target. Her bolt-action rifle cycled with mechanical precision extract the spent cartridge, chamber a fresh round, and acquire the next target. The entire process took less than 2 seconds, a testament to the countless hours she had spent practicing these movements until they became as natural as breathing. The second German sniper, positioned in the bombed-out apartment building, was just beginning to react to the sound of the first shot when Pavlichenko's crosshairs found him. At 415 meters, he presented a more challenging target, partially concealed behind a concrete wall with only his upper torso visible. But his positioning, which had seemed so tactically sound moments before, now worked against him. In his attempt to maintain observation of the Soviet positions while remaining concealed, he had created a predictable firing position that Pavlichenko had already studied extensively. The German sniper was turning his rifle toward the sound of the first shot, trying to locate the threat when Pavlichenko's second bullet found its mark. The armor-piercing round punched through the concrete debris that had been providing him with partial concealment and struck him in the upper chest. The impact was immediately fatal, and his body slumped forward over his rifle, confirming the second kill. The third German sniper, positioned in the ruins of the church, was the most dangerous at this point. He had heard both shots and was actively searching for their source. His training and experience told him that he was under attack by a highly skilled marksman, and he was attempting to either locate the threat or withdraw to a more secure position. This was the critical moment. If he managed to escape or call for reinforcements, Pavlichenko's mission would become infinitely more complicated. But Pavlichenko had anticipated this exact scenario. Her positioning in the bakery ruins had been chosen specifically to provide clear sight lines to all three German positions while offering her multiple escape routes if the situation deteriorated. She had calculated that the third sniper would most likely attempt to withdraw toward the rear of the church, where additional cover was available. This predicted movement pattern would give her a brief window of opportunity as he exposed himself while changing positions. The German sniper began his tactical withdrawal exactly as Pavlichenko had predicted. He was moving in short, controlled rushes from one piece of cover to another, a textbook example of how elite soldiers operate under fire. But his training, thorough as it was, had not prepared him for facing an opponent of Pavlichenko's caliber. She had already calculated the timing of his movements and positioned her rifle to intercept him at the exact moment he would be most vulnerable. The third shot was the most technically demanding of the sequence. The target was moving, partially obscured by debris, and at a range of 425 meters with a slight downward angle that required different ballistic calculations than the previous two engagements. Pavlichenko had to lead the target, accounting for his movement speed and direction while simultaneously compensating for the range and elevation differences. Her rifle fired for the third time in less than 10 seconds. The bullet struck the German sniper as he attempted to dash between two pieces of rubble, catching him in mid-stride and ending his life instantly. He collapsed in the open ground between his former position and the cover he had been attempting to reach, his rifle falling several feet away from his body. The silence that followed was profound. In the space of 10 seconds, 3 of Germany's elite snipers had been eliminated by a single marksman firing from a concealed position that they had never detected. The impossible had become reality, and the legend of Lady Death had reached a new pinnacle, but Pavlichenko knew that her work was far from finished. The sound of rifle fire would have been heard by other German forces in the area, and counter-battery fire or infantry response units might already be moving toward her position. She had planned for this contingency, preparing multiple escape routes and alternate positions that would allow her to withdraw safely if necessary. However, before withdrawing, she took a moment to confirm her kills through her telescopic sight. All 3 German snipers were motionless, their weapons abandoned, their threat permanently neutralized. The mathematical precision of her shooting had been perfect. 3 targets, 3 bullets, 3 confirmed kills. It was a feat that would be discussed and analyzed by military historians for decades to come. The psychological impact of this engagement would prove to be as significant as its tactical importance. Word of the triple elimination spread rapidly through both Soviet and German forces. For the Soviets, it was a tremendous morale boost, proof that even the most elite German forces could be defeated by superior skill and determination. For the Germans, it was a sobering reminder that the Eastern Front contained threats unlike anything they had encountered in their previous campaigns. The immediate aftermath of Pavlichenko's impossible triple kill sent shockwaves through the German command structure in Sevastopol. Within hours of the engagement, German officers were receiving reports that seemed too extraordinary to believe. 3 of their most elite snipers, positioned in a mutually supporting formation that should have been impregnable, had been eliminated simultaneously by a single enemy marksman. The tactical implications were staggering, but the psychological impact was even more profound. Intelligence reports quickly identified the likely perpetrator, Senior Lieutenant Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the Soviet sniper who had already earned the Cody name Lady Death for her devastating effectiveness against German forces. But this engagement represented something qualitatively different from her previous kills. This wasn't simply exceptional marksmanship. It was a demonstration of tactical sophistication and psychological warfare that forced German commanders to completely reassess their understanding of what they were facing. The German response was immediate and massive. Counter-sniper units that had been deployed across the entire Sevastopol front were redirected to hunt down Pavlichenko. Artillery coordinates were prepared for every conceivable sniper position in the sector where the engagement had occurred. Infantry patrols were increased, and strict movement protocols were implemented to prevent any single marksman from achieving similar results in the future. But finding Pavlichenko proved impossible. By the time German forces reached the area where the shots had originated, she had vanished completely. Her position in the bombed-out bakery showed evidence of meticulous preparation, carefully constructed firing lanes, multiple escape routes, and absolutely no trace of where she had gone. It was as if she had simply materialized long enough to eliminate 3 elite soldiers and then disappeared back into the rubble and chaos of the besieged city. The technical analysis of the engagement revealed the true magnitude of what had been accomplished. Ballistics experts examining the scene calculated that the 3 shots had been fired within a span of 8 to 10 seconds, from a single position, at ranges varying from 380 to 425 meters. Each shot had been precisely placed for maximum lethality, and the sequence of engagements showed clear evidence of pre-planning and tactical sophistication that impressed even German military professionals. What made the achievement even more remarkable was the equipment disparity. The German snipers had been armed with superior rifles, advanced optics, and specialized ammunition. They had occupied carefully prepared positions with excellent fields of fire and mutual support. By every conventional military calculation, they should have been able to defeat any individual threat. That they had been eliminated so completely and efficiently by a single opponent using inferior equipment demonstrated a level of skill that challenged fundamental assumptions about sniper warfare. The psychological warfare aspects of the engagement were equally impressive. Post-battle analysis revealed that Pavlichenko had used decoy targets to manipulate the German snipers into exposing themselves at precisely the moment she was ready to engage. This demonstrated not just exceptional marksmanship, but a deep understanding of enemy psychology and tactical behavior. She had effectively turned the Germans' own training and discipline against them. News of the engagement spread rapidly through Soviet forces, providing a tremendous boost to morale at a time when the siege of Sevastopol was extracting a terrible toll on the defenders. Here was proof that individual skill and determination could overcome even the most sophisticated enemy forces. Pavlichenko became more than just a successful sniper. She became a symbol of Soviet resistance and the possibility of victory against overwhelming odds. The ripple effects extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. German sniper operations across the entire Eastern Front were modified to account for the threat that Pavlichenko represented. Coordinated sniper teams were repositioned more frequently, communication protocols were changed, and additional resources were dedicated to counter-sniper operations. The fear of facing another Lady Death began to affect German sniper effectiveness throughout the theater of operations. For Pavlichenko herself, the successful completion of what many had considered a suicide mission represented a personal and professional pinnacle. She had proven that the impossible was achievable through perfect preparation, flawless execution, and absolute commitment to mission success. Her kill count now stood at over 300 confirmed eliminations, making her not just the most successful female sniper in history, but one of the most effective snipers of any gender in modern warfare. But the engagement also highlighted the brutal mathematics of sniper warfare on the Eastern Front. Every confirmed kill represented not just a tactical victory, but the end of a human life. The German snipers who had been eliminated were skilled soldiers who had families, dreams, and stories of their own. Pavlichenko understood this reality better than most, but she had learned to compartmentalize the human cost of her actions in service of the larger struggle for her homeland's survival. The intelligence value of the engagement was also significant. The elimination of the German sniper team provided Soviet forces with detailed information about enemy tactics, equipment, and positioning strategies. This intelligence would prove valuable in future counter-sniper operations and contributed to the overall defensive efforts at Sevastopol. As word of the engagement reached higher levels of Soviet command, plans were already being made to extract Pavlichenko from the front lines. Her value as a propaganda asset and training instructor was beginning to outweigh her tactical contribution as an active sniper. The impossible shot that had eliminated 3 German snipers would mark the beginning of the end of her combat career. Though she didn't know it yet, the siege of Sevastopol would continue for several more months, ultimately ending with the city's fall to German forces. But the legend of the impossible triple kill would endure, inspiring Soviet snipers and terrifying German forces for the remainder of the war. In the annals of military history, few individual actions have demonstrated so clearly the power of exceptional skill combined with perfect tactical execution. The weeks following the impossible triple kill transformed Pavlichenko from a highly effective sniper into something approaching a mythical figure. Soviet propaganda machinery, always eager for heroes who could inspire the masses, latched onto her story with unprecedented enthusiasm. Radio broadcasts carried tales of Lady Death across the Soviet Union. Newspapers published articles about the woman who could eliminate entire German sniper teams single-handedly, and her photograph appeared on recruitment posters encouraging other women to join the fight for the motherland. But fame came with a price that Pavlichenko had never anticipated. The attention made her a priority target for German forces, who now dedicated significant resources to eliminating the sniper who had become both a tactical threat and a propaganda nightmare. German intelligence had compiled an extensive dossier on her preferred operating methods, her known positions, even her personal background as a history student from Kiev University. The hunt for Lady Death had become personal. The German response to Pavlichenko's continued success was unprecedented in its scope and intensity. Elite counter-sniper units from across the Eastern Front were reassigned to Sevastopol specifically to hunt her down. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were hand-picked marksmen with years of experience and advanced training in anti-sniper warfare. Some had been recruited from civilian shooting competitions. Others were veterans of specialized military units. And a few were even former police sharpshooters who had been pressed into military service. Leading this effort was Obergefreiter Klaus Weber, a German sniper with over 150 confirmed kills to his credit. Weber had earned his reputation during the Wehrmacht's campaigns in France and the Low Countries, where his ability to eliminate enemy officers and key personnel had earned him decorations and the respect of his peers. He had been specifically requested by the Sevastopol command to lead the operation against Pavlichenko, and he approached the mission with the methodical precision that had made him one of Germany's most feared marksmen. Weber's analysis of Pavlichenko's tactics revealed a level of sophistication that impressed even her enemies. Her use of psychological warfare, her ability to manipulate enemy behavior through decoy targets and misdirection, and her uncanny knack for disappearing after successful engagements demonstrated skills that went far beyond simple marksmanship. Weber realized that hunting Lady Death would require more than just superior shooting. It would demand a complete understanding of her psychological profile and tactical preferences. The German counter-sniper operation began with extensive surveillance of areas where Pavlichenko was known to operate. Observation posts were established at key vantage points, and German forces began mapping every possible sniper hide within the Soviet defensive perimeter. They studied her previous engagements, looking for patterns in her positioning, timing, and target selection. The goal was to predict where she would strike next and be ready with overwhelming force when she appeared. Meanwhile, Pavlichenko continued her deadly work, seemingly oblivious to the massive effort being mounted against her. Her kill count continued to climb: 310, 320, 330 confirmed eliminations. Each number represented another German soldier who would never return home, another family that would receive a death notification, another small victory in the grinding war of attrition that the Eastern Front had become. But Pavlichenko was far from oblivious to the increased attention. Her survival instincts, honed by months of combat, told her that something had changed. German patrols were more frequent and more focused. Enemy positions were being rotated more regularly, and there were signs of increased surveillance in areas where she typically operated. She began to vary her patterns even more than usual, changing not just her positions, but her entire operational methodology. The cat-and-mouse game between Pavlichenko and her German hunters reached new levels of intensity. Each side tried to anticipate the other's moves, creating elaborate deceptions and counter-deceptions. Pavlichenko would set up decoy positions to draw out German observers, while Weber's team would establish fake targets to lure her into pre-planned killing zones. The psychological pressure on both sides was enormous. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and the hunter could become the hunted. The breakthrough in the German operation came from an unexpected source. A Soviet deserter, captured during a failed infiltration attempt, provided detailed information about Pavlichenko's support network within the city. He revealed the locations of safe houses where she rested between missions, the supply routes used to provide her with ammunition and equipment, and most crucially, the identity of her spotter, a young soldier named Pavel Kovalenko, who had been working with her for several weeks. Armed with this intelligence, Weber began to formulate a plan that would use Pavlichenko's own tactics against her. Instead of trying to hunt her directly, he would target her support network, forcing her to respond in predictable ways. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Eliminate her spotter in a way that would appear to be a routine engagement, then wait for Pavlichenko to attempt revenge. Her emotional response to losing a comrade would make her vulnerable in ways that her professional discipline never would. The stage was set for a confrontation between two of the most skilled snipers on the Eastern Front. Weber had the advantage of superior equipment, extensive intelligence, and a carefully planned trap. Pavlichenko had her unmatched skill, intimate knowledge of the terrain, and the psychological edge that came from never having been defeated in sniper combat. The outcome would depend on who could better read their opponent's mind and anticipate their next move. As the siege of Sevastopol entered its final phase, both snipers prepared for what they knew would be their ultimate test. The impossible triple kill had made Pavlichenko famous, but surviving the trap that was being set for her would require every skill she had developed during her extraordinary career. The trap was sprung on a gray morning in late June 1942, when the siege of Sevastopol had reached its most desperate phase. German forces were closing in on the city's final defensive positions, and Soviet resistance was being compressed into an ever smaller perimeter. It was in this chaotic environment that Obergefreiter Weber chose to execute his plan against Lady Death. Pavel Kovalenko, Pavlichenko's spotter and one of the few people she trusted implicitly, was conducting routine reconnaissance from a position overlooking the harbor when Weber's bullet found him. The shot was perfectly placed, a single round to the head that killed the young soldier instantly. From Weber's perspective, hidden in a carefully prepared hide nearly 500 meters away, the elimination appeared to be a routine engagement, the kind of opportunistic kill that characterized sniper warfare in urban combat. But Weber had made a crucial miscalculation. He had assumed that Pavlichenko would react emotionally to her spotter's death, that grief and anger would cloud her judgment and make her vulnerable. He had positioned additional German snipers in overwatch positions, ready to eliminate Lady Death when she inevitably came seeking revenge. The trap was perfectly laid, the bait had been taken, and now all that remained was to wait for the prey to reveal herself. Pavlichenko's reaction to Kovalenko's death was immediate and intense, but not in the way Weber had anticipated. Instead of rushing to avenge her fallen comrade, she retreated to a secure position and began the methodical analysis that had kept her alive through hundreds of combat engagements. She studied the ballistics of the shot that had killed Kovalenko, calculated the likely firing position, and most importantly, recognized the engagement for what it was, a trap designed specifically for her, the realization that she was being hunted by someone who understood her methods was both terrifying and exhilarating. For months, Pavlichenko had been the apex predator on the Sevastopol battlefield, eliminating targets with near impunity. Now she faced an opponent who had studied her tactics, anticipated her responses, and was using her own psychological profile against her. It was the ultimate test of her skills as both a sniper and a tactician. Weber's team had established a complex network of observation, posts and sniper positions, designed to cover every conceivable approach to Kovalenko's body. They knew that Soviet doctrine called for the recovery of fallen comrades whenever possible, and they assumed that Pavlichenko's personal connection to her spotter would make such a recovery attempt inevitable. Multiple German marksmen were positioned to create interlocking fields of fire, ensuring that any rescue attempt would end in disaster. But Pavlichenko had no intention of playing by Weber's rules. Instead of attempting to recover Kovalenko's body or seeking immediate revenge, she began her own counter-surveillance operation. Using techniques she had developed during her time in Odessa, she started mapping the German positions, identifying their patrol patterns, and most importantly, searching for the signature of the marksman who had killed her spotter. The psychological warfare between the two snipers intensified over the following days. Weber, growing impatient with Pavlichenko's failure to take his bait, began to make increasingly aggressive moves. He eliminated several Soviet soldiers in the area around Kovalenko's body, each kill designed to provoke an emotional response from Lady Death. His message was clear: he controlled that sector of the battlefield, and he was willing to kill anyone who entered it. Pavlichenko's response was characteristically methodical. She began to study Weber's shooting patterns, analyzing the ballistics of each kill to build a profile of his equipment, his preferred positions, and his tactical preferences. She realized that she was facing a marksman of exceptional skill. His shots were precisely placed, his positioning was tactically sound, and his patience was remarkable. This was no ordinary counter-sniper operation. This was a duel between two masters of their craft. The breakthrough came when Pavlichenko noticed a subtle pattern in Weber's engagements. He had a slight preference for shots that required difficult calculations, long-range targets, moving objectives, or engagements through multiple obstacles. It was the mark of a sniper who took pride in his technical expertise, someone who viewed each kill as a demonstration of his superior skill. This psychological insight gave Pavlichenko the key she needed to turn the trap against its creator. Her plan was audacious in its complexity, and potentially suicidal in its execution. Instead of avoiding Weber's trap, she would walk directly into it, but on her terms. She would present herself as a target in a way that would appeal to Weber's professional pride, challenging him to attempt a shot that would require all of his technical skill. In the split second when he was focused on making that difficult shot, she would eliminate him. The plan required perfect timing, flawless execution, and a level of calculated risk that would have terrified lesser snipers. Pavlichenko would have to expose herself to enemy fire, trust in her ability to read Weber's psychology, and execute A shot of extraordinary difficulty while under direct threat. One miscalculation, one moment of hesitation, and Lady Death would become another casualty of the siege of Sevastopol. As she prepared for what might be her final engagement, Pavlichenko thought about the young spotter whose death had triggered this deadly game. Pavel Kovalenko had been more than just a military colleague. He had been a friend, someone who had shared the unique bonds that form between soldiers who face death together. His loss was personal, but revenge was not her primary motivation. She was fighting for something larger than personal vengeance. She was fighting for the survival of her homeland and the protection of her comrades. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test every skill both snipers had developed. Weber had the advantage of preparation and positioning, but Pavlichenko had something equally valuable: the ability to think beyond conventional tactics and execute plans that others would consider impossible. The final confrontation began at dawn on July 1, 1942, with Pavlichenko implementing one of the most audacious sniper tactics ever recorded in military history. Rather than avoiding Weber's carefully prepared trap, she decided to spring it deliberately, but with a twist that would turn the German sniper's own expertise against him. Her plan required her to become the bait in her own counter-trap, exposing herself to enemy fire in order to create the perfect opportunity for a killing shot. Pavlichenko's first move was to create a false trail that would lead Weber to believe he had successfully predicted her behavior. She left subtle signs of her presence near Kovalenko's body, a small disturbance in the rubble that could indicate a sniper hide, a reflection that might come from a scope lens, and most importantly, evidence that someone had been observing the German positions. These clues were carefully calculated to appeal to Weber's analytical mind and draw him into position for the shot she knew he couldn't resist attempting. Weber took the bait exactly as Pavlichenko had anticipated. His analysis of the false evidence led him to conclude that Lady Death was preparing to attempt a recovery of her spotter's body from a position approximately 400 meters from his hide. The shot would be technically challenging a moving target, at long range, partially concealed by debris, but well within his capabilities. More importantly, it would represent the culmination of his hunt for the most feared sniper on the Eastern Front. What Weber didn't realize was that Pavlichenko had spent days studying his psychology through his shooting patterns. She had identified his pride in technical excellence as both his greatest strength and his potential weakness. The shot she was offering him was designed to be irresistible, difficult enough to challenge his skills, but achievable enough that he would be confident of success. It was exactly the kind of engagement that would appeal to a marksman of his caliber. The position Pavlichenko actually occupied was a masterpiece of tactical deception. While Weber focused on the area where he believed she was hiding, she had positioned herself in a location that provided a clear shot at his hide while remaining completely invisible from his perspective. The geometry was perfect. She could observe him through her scope while he remained unaware of her true location, watching for a target that existed only in his expectations. As the morning progressed, Pavlichenko watched Weber through her telescopic sight, studying his movements and waiting for the perfect moment. She could see him adjusting his position, fine-tuning his scope settings, and preparing for what he believed would be the shot that eliminated Lady Death. His confidence was evident in his body language. This was a marksman at the peak of his profession, preparing to demonstrate his superiority over a legendary opponent. The critical moment came when Pavlichenko deployed the final element of her deception. Using a technique she had perfected during her impossible triple kill, she created the illusion of movement in the area where Weber expected to find her. A carefully positioned helmet on a stick, moved with nearly imperceptible timing, created the impression of a sniper changing positions. To Weber, watching through his scope at 400 meters, it appeared that his quarry was finally revealing herself. Weber's response was exactly what Pavlichenko had predicted. He shifted his position slightly to get a better angle on what he believed was his target, adjusting his rifle and preparing for the shot that would end his hunt for Lady Death. In doing so, he exposed himself in precisely the way Pavlichenko had calculated he would. His head and shoulders became visible through a gap in his concealment, presenting her with the clean shot she had been waiting for. The irony of the situation was profound. Weber, one of Germany's most skilled snipers, was about to be eliminated by the very tactics he had hoped to use against his opponent. His technical expertise, his careful preparation, and his confident analysis of the situation had all been turned against him by a marksman who understood not just the mechanics of sniper warfare, but its psychological dimensions as well. Pavlichenko's shot was fired at the exact moment Weber was preparing to engage what he believed was her position. The timing was perfect. His attention was completely focused on his own target. His body was positioned to give her the clearest possible shot, and his confidence had made him momentarily careless about his own concealment. The bullet struck him in the head, killing him instantly and ending one of the most intense sniper duels of World War II. The elimination of Weber had immediate tactical and psychological consequences. The German counter-sniper operation against Pavlichenko collapsed with the death of its leader, and the remaining marksmen in his team found themselves outmatched and demoralized. Word of Weber's death spread rapidly through German forces, confirming that Lady Death was not just a skilled marksman but a tactical genius who could outthink and outmaneuver even their most elite specialists. For Pavlichenko, the successful conclusion of the duel represented more than just another confirmed kill. It was validation of her entire approach to sniper warfare, the combination of technical skill, psychological insight, and tactical innovation that had made her the most feared marksman on the Eastern Front. She had faced the best the German military could offer and emerged victorious through superior planning and execution. The death of Pavel Kovalenko had been avenged, but more importantly, the threat to her continued operations had been eliminated. She could return to her primary mission of eliminating German forces and supporting the defense of Sevastopol, though she knew that her time on the front lines was drawing to a close. Soviet command was already making plans to extract her from combat operations, recognizing that her value as a symbol and instructor was beginning to outweigh her tactical contribution as an active sniper. As she prepared to withdraw from the position where she had eliminated Weber, Pavlichenko took a moment to reflect on the duel that had just concluded. She had faced death more directly than ever before, betting everything on her ability to read her opponent's mind and execute a plan of extraordinary complexity and risk. The aftermath of Weber's elimination marked the beginning of the end of Pavlichenko's combat career, though she didn't realize it at the time. Soviet High Command had been monitoring the intense German effort to eliminate their most famous sniper, and Weber's death confirmed what they had already suspected. Lady Death had become too valuable to risk losing in combat. Plans were already in motion to extract her from the siege of Sevastopol and transition her to roles that would maximize her propaganda value while preserving her life. The siege itself was entering its final phase. By early July 1942, German forces had compressed the Soviet defenders into a small perimeter around the city center and harbor. Artillery bombardment was constant, supplies were nearly exhausted, and casualty rates had reached catastrophic levels. Even Pavlichenko's extraordinary skills couldn't change the fundamental reality that Sevastopol was doomed to fall. The question was no longer whether the city would be captured, but how much longer the defenders could hold out. During these final weeks of the siege, Pavlichenko continued to add to her already legendary kill count. Her final confirmed elimination at Sevastopol brought her total to 309 enemy soldiers killed in action, a number that would never be surpassed by any female sniper in military history. Each of these kills represented hours of patient stalking, perfect shot placement under extreme conditions, and the constant risk of death from counter-sniper operations, artillery strikes, or infantry assaults. But the numbers alone couldn't capture the full impact of Pavlichenko's service at Sevastopol. Her psychological warfare had terrorized German forces throughout the siege. Her tactical innovations had influenced Soviet sniper doctrine, and her very presence on the battlefield had provided an enormous morale boost to the defenders. She had become more than just a soldier. She was a symbol of Soviet resistance and the possibility that individual skill and determination could triumph over overwhelming odds. The extraction order came in mid-July, disguised as a routine transfer to a training facility in the Soviet rear. Pavlichenko was told that she would be training new snipers, sharing her expertise with the next generation of marksmen who would carry on the fight against the German invaders. What she wasn't told was that Soviet leadership had already decided she would never return to combat operations. Lady Death had become too important to the war effort to risk losing in battle. Her departure from Sevastopol was conducted under maximum security, with multiple decoy convoys and false identities designed to prevent German forces from intercepting the woman they had spent so much effort trying to eliminate. Even in retreat, Pavlichenko represented a strategic asset that required careful protection. The submarine that carried her away from the doomed city also carried detailed intelligence reports, wounded officers, and other high-value personnel, whose knowledge was considered crucial to the Soviet war effort. The fall of Sevastopol came just days after Pavlichenko's evacuation. The city that had withstood 250 days of siege finally succumbed to the overwhelming German assault, its defenders either killed, captured, or evacuated in the final desperate hours. The fortress that had cost the Wehrmacht so much blood and time was finally in German hands, but the propaganda value of the heroic defense would serve Soviet interests for the remainder of the war. Pavlichenko's new role as a trainer and propaganda figure took her far from the front lines, but kept her deeply involved in the war effort. At the Central Women's Sniper Training School, she developed curricula that incorporated all the lessons she had learned during her combat career. Her students learned not just marksmanship fundamentals, but the psychological techniques, tactical innovations, and survival skills that had made Lady Death legendary. The training program she developed emphasized the mental aspects of sniper warfare as much as the technical skills. Students learned to read enemy psychology, to use deception and misdirection as weapons, and to maintain the emotional detachment necessary for effective killing at long range. Many of her graduates would go on to distinguished combat careers of their own, carrying Pavlichenko's methods and philosophy to battlefields across the Eastern Front. Her propaganda activities took her even further from her roots as a combat soldier. Speaking tours, interviews with international journalists, and appearances at war bond rallies transformed the former history student into one of the most recognizable faces of the Soviet war effort. She met with world leaders, addressed the United Nations, and became a powerful symbol of both Soviet military prowess and women's contribution to the fight against fascism. But Pavlichenko never forgot the soldiers she had left behind at Sevastopol, or the young spotter whose death had triggered her final deadly duel with Obergefreiter Weber. In her speeches and interviews, she consistently emphasized that her achievements were meaningless compared to the sacrifice of the ordinary soldiers who had died defending their homeland. She spoke of Pavel Kovalenko not as a footnote to her own story, but as a hero whose death had meaning only if the cause for which he died ultimately triumphed. The impossible shot that had eliminated 3 German snipers with 3 bullets became the centerpiece of her legend. But Pavlichenko always insisted that it was just one engagement among many in a war that was far from over. She understood that her individual achievements, remarkable as they were, could not win the war by themselves. Victory would require the collective sacrifice of millions of Soviet citizens, each playing their part in the great struggle against Nazi Germany. As the war continued and Soviet forces began their long advance toward Berlin, Pavlichenko remained in the rear areas, training new snipers and serving as a symbol of what could be accomplished through skill, determination, and absolute commitment to victory. Her days of personal combat were over, but her influence on the war effort continued through the hundreds of students she trained and the millions of citizens she inspired. The girl who had started the war as a history student had become history herself, her impossible achievements ensuring that the name Lyudmila Pavlichenko would be remembered long after the last shot of World War II had been fired. The transformation from combat sniper to international symbol brought Pavlichenko face to face with a different kind of warfare, one fought with words, images, and carefully crafted narratives rather than bullets and blood. In late 1942, she was selected for an unprecedented diplomatic mission that would take her far from the battlefields of the Eastern Front to the Allied nations whose support was crucial to Soviet survival. The woman who had once eliminated German snipers with mathematical precision would now be tasked with eliminating Western skepticism about Soviet military capabilities and the role of women in combat. Her first major international appearance was in Britain, where she met with government officials, military leaders, and journalists eager to learn about the legendary Lady Death. The British, who had been fighting alone against Nazi Germany for over 2 years before the Soviet Union entered the war, were initially skeptical about Soviet claims regarding Pavlichenko's achievements. How could a young woman, barely past her 25th birthday, have eliminated over 300 enemy soldiers? The numbers seemed too extraordinary to be credible, but Pavlichenko's quiet confidence and detailed knowledge of sniper warfare quickly dispelled any doubts about her authenticity. When questioned by British military experts about her tactics, equipment, and the technical aspects of her achievements, she responded with the precision and expertise that could only come from extensive combat experience. Her explanations of ballistics, her understanding of battlefield psychology, and her matter-of-fact descriptions of life and death situations convinced even the most skeptical observers that her reputation was well-deserved. The British press, initially prepared to treat her visit as a curiosity, found themselves confronting a serious professional soldier whose achievements challenged their preconceptions about women's roles in modern warfare. Newspaper interviews revealed a complex individual who combined deadly efficiency with intellectual depth. She could discuss the finer points of rifle accuracy in one breath and analyze the historical parallels between World War II and previous conflicts in the next. Her background as a history student proved invaluable in these interactions, allowing her to place her personal experiences within broader strategic and historical contexts. From Britain, Pavlichenko traveled to the United States, where her reception was even more intense. American media, fascinated by this real-life embodiment of Soviet women's liberation, covered her visit extensively. She addressed Congress, met with President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and participated in rallies designed to build support for increased aid to the Soviet Union. Her message was consistent. The war against Nazi Germany was a shared struggle that required maximum effort from all Allied nations. The American tour revealed both the power and the limitations of Pavlichenko's role as a propaganda figure. Her presentations about Soviet military capabilities were highly effective in building support for Lend-Lease aid and demonstrating that the Red Army was a capable fighting force worthy of American assistance. Military audiences were particularly impressed by her tactical knowledge and her insights into German weaknesses that could be exploited by Allied forces. However, Pavlichenko also encountered aspects of American society that troubled her deeply. The racial segregation she observed in many parts of the country conflicted with Soviet ideological claims about American democracy, while the material abundance she witnessed stood in stark contrast to the desperate conditions she had left behind. In the Soviet Union, these contradictions forced her to grapple with complex questions about the nature of the alliance between nations with fundamentally different political and economic systems. The most challenging aspect of her international role was the constant pressure to present a sanitized version of her combat experiences. Audiences wanted to hear about her achievements, but were often uncomfortable with the brutal realities of sniper warfare. Pavlichenko found herself walking a delicate line between honest testimony about the nature of combat and the need to maintain public morale and support for the war effort. She could describe her tactical methods and strategic thinking, but the psychological toll of killing hundreds of human beings was a subject that required more delicate handling. During her time abroad, Pavlichenko received regular updates about the war's progress on the Eastern Front. The news was often devastating: entire cities destroyed, millions of soldiers and civilians killed, and the gradual realization that victory, if it came at all, would require years of additional fighting and unimaginable sacrifice. Her former comrades were dying in battles she could only read about in intelligence reports, while she addressed comfortable audiences in heated auditoriums, thousands of miles from the front lines. The contrast between her current role and her previous life as a combat soldier created a complex emotional burden. She understood the importance of her propaganda work and recognized that her contributions to maintaining Allied unity might ultimately save more lives than she could ever have eliminated with her rifle. But the separation from active combat also meant separation from the immediate life-and-death reality that had defined her existence for over a year. She was fighting the war through speeches and interviews rather than through the scope of her Mosin Nagant. Rifled-out letters from surviving members of her unit kept her connected to the ongoing struggle. Former students from her training programs wrote to describe their combat experiences, often crediting her instruction with saving their lives. Reports filtered back about the continued effectiveness of Soviet sniper operations, many of which incorporated tactical innovations that Pavlichenko had developed during her time at Sevastopol. Her influence on the war effort continued even though she was no longer personally pulling the trigger. As 1943 progressed, and the tide of war began to shift in favor of the Allied nations, Pavlichenko's role evolved once again. She became involved in planning for the post-war period, contributing to discussions about how the lessons learned during the conflict could be incorporated into future military doctrine. Her experiences as both a combat soldier and an international representative gave her unique insights into the intersection of military effectiveness and political requirements. The impossible shot that had made her famous 3 German snipers eliminated with 3 bullets had become the foundation for a career that extended far beyond individual combat achievements. She had proven that exceptional skill and determination could triumph over overwhelming odds, but she had also learned that individual achievements, no matter how remarkable, were meaningful only as part of a larger collective effort. The war's end in May 1945 brought both celebration and profound uncertainty for Pavlichenko. After years of conflict that had consumed virtually every aspect of Soviet society, the challenge now was to find meaning and purpose in a world at peace. For someone whose adult life had been defined by the deadly precision of sniper warfare, the transition to civilian existence presented unexpected difficulties. The skills that had made her the most feared marksman on the Eastern Front, patience, emotional detachment, and the ability to kill at long range, were not easily adapted to peacetime pursuits. The Soviet Union that emerged from World War II was fundamentally different from the nation that had been invaded in June 1941. Millions of people had died, entire cities had been destroyed and rebuilt, and the trauma of the conflict had left deep scars on the collective psyche. For veterans like Pavlichenko, the challenge was not just personal adjustment, but also coming to terms with the magnitude of what they had experienced and witnessed. The war had transformed ordinary citizens into killers, survivors, and heroes, But victory didn't automatically erase the psychological toll of those transformations. Pavlichenko's post-war career reflected both her unique experiences and the broader challenges facing Soviet society. She was appointed to positions in the Soviet military establishment that utilized her expertise in sniper warfare and training. But these roles also served the political purpose of maintaining her visibility as a symbol of Soviet military prowess. The Cold War was beginning, and heroes of the Great Patriotic War became valuable assets in the ideological struggle between the Soviet Union and its former Western allies. Her work developing sniper training programs continued throughout the late 1940s and 1950s, as the Soviet military incorporated the lessons learned during World War II into preparations for potential future conflicts. The innovations in tactics, equipment, and training methods that Pavlichenko had pioneered during her combat career became standard elements of Soviet military doctrine. Generations of snipers learned techniques that could be traced directly back to her experiences at Odessa and Sevastopol. The transition from combat soldier to peacetime instructor required Pavlichenko to confront aspects of her wartime experiences that she had previously compartmentalized. During active combat, the psychological mechanisms that allowed her to kill effectively also protected her from dwelling on the human cost of her actions. In peacetime, with the immediate threat of death removed, those protective mechanisms began to break down, forcing her to grapple with memories and emotions that she had suppressed during the war. The fame that had made her an effective propaganda figure during the war became both a blessing and a burden in peacetime. She was regularly called upon to participate in commemorative events, speak at veterans' gatherings, and represent the Soviet Union at international functions related to World War II. These appearances kept her story alive in public memory, but they also meant that she could never fully escape the identity that had been forged in the crucible of combat. One of the most significant aspects of Pavlichenko's post-war life was her relationship with other veterans, particularly women, who had served in combat roles during the war. The Soviet Union had mobilized women for military service on a scale unprecedented in modern warfare, and many of these veterans faced similar challenges in adjusting to peacetime society. Pavlichenko became an informal advocate for these women, working to ensure that their contributions were recognized and that they received appropriate support and recognition. Her academic background, which had been interrupted by the war, became important again as she pursued advanced degrees in history. The analytical skills that had served her well as a sniper proved equally valuable in historical research, and she completed a doctoral dissertation that examined the role of snipers in modern warfare. This academic work allowed her to place her personal experiences within broader historical and military contexts, contributing to the scholarly understanding of how individual actions could influence the outcome of major conflicts. The international reputation she had gained during her wartime diplomatic missions continued to serve Soviet interests during the Cold War. She participated in peace conferences, cultural exchanges, and other diplomatic initiatives designed to promote Soviet positions on international issues. Her status as a war hero gave her credibility with audiences that might have been skeptical of purely political figures, and her personal story of triumph over seemingly impossible odds resonated with people around the world. As the decades passed, Pavlichenko's role evolved from active participant to historical witness. Younger generations who had no personal memory of World War II looked to veterans like her to understand what the conflict had really been like. Her accounts of the siege of Sevastopol, her impossible triple kill, and her duel with Obergefreiter Weber became important historical documents that preserved the reality of combat experiences that might otherwise have been lost to time. The burden of being a historical figure was considerable. Every public appearance, every interview, and every written account became part of the permanent record of World War II. Pavlichenko understood that her words and actions would be studied by historians, military analysts, and ordinary citizens for generations to come. This awareness added weight to her public statements and influenced how she chose to present her experiences. The psychological cost of carrying such responsibility was significant. Pavlichenko had to balance her desire to present an accurate account of her experiences with the need to maintain the inspirational power of her story. Too much emphasis on the brutal realities of combat might discourage young people from serving their country if necessary, while too much sanitization might rob her story of its authenticity and power. Despite these challenges, Pavlichenko found satisfaction in her post-war roles. She had survived not just the war itself but also the difficult transition to peacetime, and she had used her experiences to contribute to military science, historical understanding, and the preservation of memory about one of humanity's most devastating conflicts. The impossible shot that had made her famous had been just the beginning of a lifetime dedicated to service, whether in combat or in peace. The final chapter of Lyudmila Pavlichenko's extraordinary life unfolded against the backdrop of a rapidly changing world. As the Soviet Union evolved through the post-Stalin era, the Khrushchev thaw, and the eventual reforms of glasnost and perestroika, Pavlichenko remained a constant link to the defining moment of Soviet history, the Great Patriotic War that had tested the nation's very survival and forged its identity for generations. In her later years, Pavlichenko became increasingly reflective about the meaning and legacy of her wartime experiences. The young woman who had once eliminated German snipers with mathematical precision had evolved into an elder stateswoman who understood that her story represented something larger than individual achievement. She had become a symbol of human resilience, the power of determination, and the extraordinary things that ordinary people could accomplish when faced with existential threats. Her final major public appearances came during the 1980s. As the Soviet Union marked the 40th anniversary of victory in World War II, by this time, Pavlichenko was in her 70s, but her memory remained sharp and her commitment to preserving the truth about the war unwavering. She participated in commemorative events, gave interviews to journalists and historians, and worked with documentary filmmakers who were trying to capture the experiences of the war's surviving veterans. These final testimonies were particularly poignant because Pavlichenko knew that she was among the last living witnesses to events that had shaped the course of world history. The impossible triple kill that had made her famous, her duel with Obergefreiter Weber, and her experiences during the siege of Sevastopol were no longer just personal memories. They were historical documents that would help future generations understand what the war had really been like for those who fought it. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 brought profound changes to how Pavlichenko's story was understood and interpreted. The heroic narratives that had defined Soviet war memory were suddenly open to re-examination, and historians began to explore aspects of the conflict that had previously been suppressed or simplified. Pavlichenko's accounts gained new importance as scholars sought to understand not just what had happened during the war, but how individual experiences had been shaped by broader political and social forces. International recognition of Pavlichenko's achievements continued to grow in her final years. Military historians from around the world sought to interview her, recognizing that her experiences provided unique insights into the nature of sniper warfare, the role of women in combat, and the psychological dimensions of prolonged conflict. Her tactical innovations were studied in military academies, and her training methods influenced sniper programs in multiple nations. The personal cost of her wartime service became more apparent as she aged. The physical demands of combat, the psychological stress of constant danger, and the burden of having killed over 300 human beings had taken their toll. Like many veterans, Pavlichenko struggled with health problems that could be traced back to her military service, and she experienced episodes of what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, but she also found meaning in the knowledge that her service had contributed to victory over Nazi Germany and the preservation of her homeland. The letters she received from former students, the reports of successful sniper operations that had used her tactical methods, and the broader historical recognition of the Soviet Union's crucial role in defeating fascism all validated the sacrifices she had made during her youth. Pavlichenko's death in 1974 marked the end of an era, but her legacy continued to grow in the decades that followed. The impossible shot that had eliminated 3 German snipers with 3 bullets became the subject of military analysis, historical research, and popular culture. Her story was told in books, films, and documentaries that reached audiences far beyond the Soviet Union, establishing her as one of the most recognizable figures from World War II. The technical aspects of her achievements continued to fascinate military professionals and shooting enthusiasts. The precision required to eliminate 3 targets at different ranges within seconds, the psychological warfare she had employed to manipulate enemy behavior, and the tactical innovations she had developed all became subjects of detailed study. Modern snipers learned from techniques that Pavlichenko had pioneered during the siege of Sevastopol, and her influence on military doctrine extended far beyond her immediate historical context. Perhaps most importantly, Pavlichenko's story challenged conventional assumptions about women's capabilities in combat roles. At a time when most militaries excluded women from frontline positions, she had proven that gender was irrelevant when it came to the skills and determination required for effective military service. Her achievements paved the way for future generations of women who would serve in combat roles, and her example continued to inspire those who faced discrimination or skepticism about their abilities. The impossible had indeed become reality through Lyudmila Pavlichenko's extraordinary service. A young history student from Kiev University had become the deadliest female sniper in human history, eliminating over 300 enemy soldiers and developing tactical innovations that influenced military doctrine for decades. But more than that, she had proven that individual skill, determination, and courage could make a decisive difference even in conflicts involving millions of participants. Her legacy reminds us that history is shaped not just by grand strategies and political decisions, but by the actions of individuals who refuse to accept that something is impossible. The 3 bullets that eliminated 3 German snipers in a matter of seconds were just the most dramatic example of what could be accomplished when exceptional skill was combined with absolute determination and perfect preparation. In the end, Lyudmila Pavlichenko's story transcends the specific circumstances of World War II to become a testament to human potential. She showed that the impossible is often just the untried, and that with enough skill, courage, and determination, even the most daunting challenges can be overcome. Her shot may have been called impossible, but she made it reality, and in doing so she changed not just the outcome of individual battles, but our understanding of what human beings can achieve when everything depends on their actions. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.